Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Molly. Always fun to do these. I think a couple weeks ago we looked at a science-esque passage, right, with the
Mhm.
turns
The
and
turns, the
yeah,
physics.
torque and physics. But now we're dealing with, another science-y kind of topic, right? Psychology.
Yeah,
And it should be pretty straightforward as a read. It usually the easier it is to read the passage, the longer it is.
yeah,
And so that's probably why it's what, 6, 7 paragraphs. Um,
yeah.
but I think the hardest part about reading any passage is understanding the exact message, being very precise with the message. Because you may read this and you kind of get what's going on if you skim, right? Like you'll have a general idea, which should help you get maybe 3 out of 6 questions right. But if you want to get every question right, you really want to get like a 129, 130 or above, you have to be very careful with how they convey their message. You have to really understand it. And I was speaking to a student recently who's been studying really hard for a long, long time. And this is something that comes up a lot with students who struggle with cars, is they read and they follow the strategies we outline in our course. They follow everything we're talking about, but they're not fully paying attention to the message. And so
Mhm.
the best advice I can give anyone is don't just look for things. Your job is to understand it at a deeper level, like be able to explain it to someone else. And
Mhm.
sometimes the anxiety, the timer, the fact that you're being judged, right? You have a score makes you want to not pay attention, right? At least subconsciously. So I would say best thing to do is go slow, try to like really understand what's going on and reflect and think about it. And I think that's going to boost your score more than anything else, right? So
Yeah.
excited to do
It's
that tonight today.
yeah. It's all about not being scared to make a mistake, right?
Yeah.
There's a quote, Henry Ford, that's the only something along the lines of this. The only true mistake is the one you don't learn from, right? Like it's scary to put yourself out there and to really try and understand, but that is the way forward. You might not be good at it right off the bat, but that's the practice that will get you the results that you want. So I love that message. It's so important to share that with students because it's something that, as you mentioned, students experience constantly. And in a passage like this, again, we mentioned this is a psych passage. You're going to feel probably comforted by the fact that this is something relating to topics that we discuss in Psych Soc. But keep in mind, this is cars. Okay, so when we go through this passage, which is one of our daily passages from July 2nd, it's called Aging Brain. We'll link it in the caption of this video or this podcast, wherever you're watching it, so you can give it a try yourself. But this passage is going to present things that feel familiar, which is nice. Hopefully, we have some baseline level of interest. Our struggle in this passage is going to be something different than you might experience for art history or philosophy or something you aren't as interested in. You might be interested, but in this situation, we just have to make sure that we're not uh, reading this for the science. We're reading it for the ideas, the bigger picture, like you mentioned, Jack. Um, when it feels like a different section, we start cluing into different parts of the passage. But like you said, we're looking for the author's points, right? Like, what are their opinions that are shining through what they're saying? So, just as a reminder, we will be going through this passage. You might feel like this sounds like a passage in a different section, but remind yourself this is cars, right? And in cars, we're looking at different parts of a passage than we would if this were science. So I'm excited to walk through this with you, Jack. And hopefully for our listeners out there, this is a fun one. We had physics before, now we've got psychology.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so let's start with paragraph one. Again, if you are new to our Cars Reading Skills workshops, we're going to go through sentence by sentence, kind of break down what you should be pulling out of each sentence. And then again, from paragraph to paragraph, what is the message here, right? And of course, if you're interested, you can try the questions. We will link the caption or in the caption so you can try the questions associated with the passage. So, paragraph one, sentence one, it says, aging, it is now clear, is part of an ongoing maturation process that all our organs go through. Okay, So we kind of set our stage here. We're talking about aging. Aging is organ maturation, right? That's the scientific way to read this, right? We're talking about how all of our organs mature, and that is aging. That really is the argument. There's not a ton going on here. Jack, are you picking up on anything different?
No, it's interesting because if we read this in a textbook, we would say, "Oh, this is just a fact," right?
Hmm.
It's not a fact. We don't know. Like we have no idea, right?
Hmm.
Like even the science that we put in textbooks isn't necessarily a fact. Like that stuff changes often. Like at one
Hmm.
point, Pluto was a planet. Now it's not a planet, right? It's a dwarf, right?
Yes.
And so that's just an example of how, as time goes on, we change how we understand the world and how we understand science. Uh,
Hmm.
and I think it's easier to understand how behavioral things can be opinions, right? Like, oh, people who eat before, oh, well, this might actually be a science, but people who eat right before bedtime don't sleep well, right? Like that's sort of like an opinion because we don't really know either. I mean, we can
Hmm.
monitor brainwave activity at night and try to figure things out, but ultimately this is an idea, an opinion, because we don't know for sure. We do experiments to test it, but we don't know for sure. And so when
Hmm.
reading this, I'm thinking to myself, okay, the author is establishing that this is probably how things work, right? That as you age, the organs are maturing, they're aging as well. Um,
Hmm.
but I take everything with a grain of salt. They could change their mind, right? And so we just need to read, not thinking in terms of facts and thinking in terms of ideas and how well they're supported or not supported. Okay.
All right. Yeah, great ideas there. Okay, let's look to our next sentence. It says, in a sense, aging is keyed to the level of vigor of the body and the continuous interaction between levels of body activity and levels of mental activity. This was all a direct quote from Arnold B. Scheibel, MD, whose very academic title reflects how once far-flung domains now converge on the mind and the brain. Okay, so normally when we see direct quotes or people that are kind of cited as evidence in a passage, I would think, okay, this is going to be the same. They're probably saying the same thing that the author just said, right? And I feel like we're still talking about aging. Now we're talking about body activity and mental activity being tied as a quote from this individual, Mr. Scheibel. Um, so we're talking about the mind and the brain kind of being related in aging, possibly. That's what I'm getting from this.
Yeah, I mean, it's bringing up mental activity, which is interesting. So there's some
Mhm.
sort of relationship between the body aging and the mind.
Mhm.
And you bring up a good point. They bring up a name of a person that supports this idea. I mean, in fact, it's quoting someone. It doesn't have to be a quote, but if someone is referenced to it, you have to know that it's not the author's opinion. Now, the author could share this opinion. We don't know,
Mhm.
right? Just because the author presents someone else's opinion doesn't mean they support it outright.
Yeah.
They could go against it. They could support it. Most likely they will, but we have to associate ideas to people, right? We have to
Mhm.
associate, like the first sentence seems to be the author's opinion because it's not referencing anyone, but this one is might not be their opinion as well. This might just be Scheibel's opinion. And so
Mhm.
keep track of names, right? Keep track of who references what. Um,
Yes.
okay, cool.
Yes. Okay, our next sentence characterizes Scheibel. So, Scheibel is a professor of anatomy, cell biology, psychiatry, and behavioral sciences at the University of California at Los Angeles and director of the university's Brain Research Institute. So, this is a fact, right? It's where this individual works and
Right.
what titles he holds. So, this is not really a sentence that's going to tell us a ton about the argument or the idea from the author, but it's definitely seeming to establish credibility for this individual Scheibel, who we mentioned earlier is kind of tied with this aging idea.
Right. Yeah. There's just, the author is just trying to establish Scheibel as an authority figure, someone that
Exactly.
should be respected because of their, status in academia, right?
Mhm.
And it's mostly filler. It's mostly just kind of a waste of time. I would read it. I would never skip anything that's presented, but you should know
Mhm.
that, like you said, this is just a fact. You will not be tested on this. They'll never ask you, oh, where did Shaibo go to school? UCLA?
Yeah.
Like they're never going to do that.
Yeah.
But just know that, hey, this is just good extra info on this person.
Yes, exactly. It would be nice sometimes if if they slipped us a question, where did Scheibel go to school? Much
That's
more direct than sometimes Cars is, but even
right.
the less direct questions have a lot that they can offer us. Um, okay, so I guess wrapping up, what do you think is important to know from paragraph one? What should we keep in mind when we go to
It's
paragraph
interesting
two?
because that first sentence is encompasses the entire paragraph. That's not always the case. Just because it's the first sentence doesn't mean that you'll always find an idea that's really important.
Hmm.
But I think aging affects all organs,
Hmm.
all of our organs, and it is the extreme, all, right? I mean, including the brain, I guess, right? I mean,
Yes.
I think the way the author is trying to present it, because Scheibel is bringing up the fact that it's also impacting our mental activity, so we can
Mm,
assume that it's also a brain thing.
yeah. Yeah. Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Um, okay, so tracking that idea, let's take a look at paragraph number two and see how that develops. So, conventional wisdom has it that as the vigor of the body declines, the power of the mind diminishes as well. Okay, so conventional wisdom, like you mentioned before, I don't know if this is the author's belief, but this certainly is what is conventional or conventional wisdom. So body declines, mind declines is kind of what I'm getting. This is the conventional idea. Will the author agree? I don't know, but body declines, mind
Yeah.
declines is what I'm getting.
That was kind of alluded to in the previous paragraph, but now it's stated directly. And again, this is an opinion. This is not a fact. We don't know for
Yeah.
sure, right? We
Mhm.
probably, it's probably the case, right? But like, we don't know, have 100% idea, clarity on this. And I love how the author said conventional wisdom,
Exactly. Yeah.
not the author's opinion. Go ahead. Sorry. You were
No, I totally agree. That phrasing, whenever I see something like that, or like it's commonly believed that, like I always wonder, like, but do you believe that, or is that what is conventional to believe? We don't know
well,
in this case, but probably they do believe it.
I'm assuming they're not going to believe it.
Yeah.
Why else would they say
Why would you
conventional?
say it's conventional? Yeah.
It's a clue. I don't even have to read the rest. I bet you the rest of this is gonna just say this is what was going on in my mind, that maybe the brain doesn't decline, and hopefully it doesn't, because I don't want my brain to decline as I age. That even though my body might decline, my brain might actually stick around longer,
Yeah.
right? That's what I'm anticipating. I
Yeah.
can anticipate it, but I'm not sticking to that. I'm not writing that down. I'm not, making that like the known thing of this passage. But as I'm reading, I'm kind of thinking about what's going on, right? And so,
Mm.
yeah, so far so good.
Yeah. So maybe Scheibel agrees, but maybe not the author.
Right.
Okay, so indeed, older people seem to slow down mentally. And we get a semicolon, so to pause there seems pretty much like what we talked before, right? Body declines, mind declines. If you're older, you're slowing down mentally. Pretty in line with what we talked about. And then the sentence continues. It says, they often become garrulous, forgetful, crotchety, and some develop outright dementia. So, again, as you age and your body begins to decline, the mind is declining. Body declines, mind declines. Seems pretty in line with what we just talked about.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, next sentence says experimental evidence has backed up popular assumptions that the aging mind undergoes decay analogous to or to that of the aging body. Interesting. So it sounds like we're citing evidence that we have actual decay, right? So we have decay in our mind that could be a physical thing, right? The body presumably is going through some sort of decay, right? we need to see what this experimental evidence is showing, but maybe this isn't just a arbitrary idea. There's some experimental evidence to back this up.
Yeah, I mean, it's straightforward, right? It's interesting because they're suggesting there's experimental evidence. Don't be fooled by that. Just because
Hmm.
someone does an experiment doesn't necessarily mean that it's 100% correct, right? And so you just need to understand that there is some sort of precedence for this information, right?
Mhm.
Something that's backing it up. But yeah, so far, similar argument, similar idea.
Yes. At least the author thinks the evidence has backed it up.
Right,
If it actually does, is up for debate.
right.
Um, okay, younger monkeys, chimps, and lower animals consistently outperform their older colleagues on memory tests. So maybe this is the evidence that they're citing, right? If you are older, your mind is decaying. This has been shown in monkeys and chimps and lower animals, pretty in line with what we mentioned
Yeah,
before.
just the this is like the experiment, basically, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, in humans, psychologists concluded memory and other mental functions deteriorate over time because of inevitable organic changes in the brain as neurons die off. Okay, so it sounds like we're concluding from this study on monkeys that memory or that neuron death is maybe what is involved in this mental diminishing or this mental decay.
Yeah, see, that's important. First of all, we're making an argument that the mind decays over time. We don't know if it does, right?
Mhm.
Now we're going even further and we're making an argument about the argument. We're
Yes.
saying, okay, we're not just saying mentally we decline, right? Now we're
Yeah.
giving a reason as to why. We don't,
Yes.
maybe the mind does decline, right? But we don't know if it's because of neuron death or because of, I don't know, something else, like maybe the weather, right?
Yeah.
Someone could easily say the weather impacts your brain's ability to, cognitively function.
Hmm.
There could be a million reasons, and none of them are provable with 100% certainty.
Yeah.
The author decided on this reason, right? Like,
Hmm.
okay, not only does the mind decline, but it's doing so because of neuron death.
Hmm.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. We only have one last sentence in this paragraph. It says, mental decline after young adulthood appeared inevitable. Okay, this word appeared, Jack, I feel like we are going to see that the author doesn't agree. If they totally agreed, why are they saying appeared inevitable?
Right.
It's not super conclusive, but I feel like there have been a couple clues in this paragraph that perhaps this is not what the author is going to ultimately believe or state. But this sentence is pretty in line, right? If you are experiencing mental decline with age and it's because your neurons are dying, yeah, declining after young adulthood is going to appear inevitable in
Right.
that.
And usually a student will think right now, why would they bring up a point that they don't end up agreeing with? Right? Because
Mm-hmm.
like we're saying right now, they're probably going to go against this whole point,
Mm-hmm.
right? Probably. And the reason why is because it makes the author seem more neutral and more
Exactly.
because if the author came in strong and hard in their opinion, you're going to probably look at them and go, wait a second, why are you so extreme? Why aren't you considering the other side? This is
Hmm.
their way of considering the other side without actually putting their name to it. Oh,
Yeah.
conventional wisdom. Oh, it appeared.
Mm.
They're distancing themselves from this position, but they feel obligated to present this position just so that when they bring up their point of view, they're more believed. They're more believable, right? You
Hmm.
believe someone more when they bring up both sides.
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely. Looks like you're a lot more careful with your arguments.
right.
Okay, so basically what it sounds like to me from our chat about paragraph 2 is that we've got this idea that as the body declines, the mind declines, and that this is because of neuronal death. We've kind of talked about monkeys as like a situation that showed that. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Okay, well, let's track that in paragraph 3 and see if we repeat or maybe if we get some hint that the author will not agree. So, the first sentence of paragraph 3 says, "The truth, however, is not quite so simple." You knew it. You called it so quick, Jack.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So the truth, right? Now the author's trying to distance themselves completely from the first paragraph, from the second paragraph. And that, however, is important, right? Because it's contrasting the entire paragraph essentially.
yeah,
And it says it's not so simple. So maybe there are some elements that are true, right? And
yeah,
that's the gray area. You have to be very careful because I'm not saying for 100% certainty that they're going to backtrack and completely disown every part of that second paragraph.
yeah,
But at the same time, they're not going to go fully with whatever conventional wisdom is. So
yes.
let's see where they end up.
Yeah. Okay, so it says some functions peak early in life, others don't get up to speed until adolescence or early adulthood. Yeah, so this is exactly what you're saying. It's not like they're completely contradicting. They're not saying as the body declines, the mind is getting more powerful. It's not like, paragraph 2 was terrible, throw it out, the opposite is true. It sounds like they're just tweaking, right? Some peak early, others peak a little bit later. And even then, we're talking adolescence and early adulthood. It's not like we're saying they're peaking, at 95 years old. So you're right. I think we're kind of tempering the idea that came before. Maybe it was a little bit of an oversimplification, not outright wrong, but just a little limited, perhaps.
That's the hard part is the author is trying to make something that's oversimplified into a little bit more granular, and if
Mm-hmm.
you're not paying attention, you're not going to find that granular part where all the questions are based off of. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's where reading carefully and really understanding and paying attention to the author's position is so helpful. And it's harder to do when you know nothing about the topic.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I'm sure if someone here, listening was a psychobio major or some psych major, you for sure probably have a better understanding of all this because you just take more classes on it, you're more familiar with it. But if you've never taken a psych class in your life, you may doubt or be intimidated by the topic, by the conversation. And so that's where practice really comes in. That's where you have to work on this, if you want to be good at it and not worry about the topic. Like, I don't care if the topic is about economics, I don't care if it's about religion or history. You got to be able to zone in
Mm-hmm.
and just focus and pay attention to those little things.
Yeah. Again, like you said, you're not going to get tested on the little details. It's the
Right.
broader stuff that's
Right.
you find it the same in every subject. Um, Okay, our next sentence says there are mental capabilities like judgment and wisdom that continue to improve as you grow older, even as others, like short-term memory and the ability to do tasks within a set time limit, may start to decline in your 40s. So, okay, it's just to show some peak early, some peak later.
Okay.
Cool. Last sentence in paragraph 3 says, although many mental functions actually begin to fall off or reach their peak at about age 24 to 28, adults do continue to learn and their mental reprogramming refines itself. Okay, so we had started by basically saying, hey, some mental functions peak later. And I feel like this is kind of it's almost fully in line, but we're now talking about the fact that adults keep learning. They're not, just in a constant state of decline. They're learning, they're adjusting throughout this whole process as adults. So that,
Yeah, the first half is more about when it peaks, when the function.
yes,
This is
exactly.
this is a completely off-topic thing where we're talking about learning. So it's sort
Hmm.
of different, right? And it is something I would keep track of, right? The fact that, okay, some peak early, some peak later, but ultimately you're still learning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a perfect summary of paragraph 3. Okay, let's look at paragraph 4. It says, what's more, research over the past decades shows that the mind constantly adjusts its way of doing things and compensates nicely for many losses in efficiency. So it kind of sounds like what we're explaining is similar to what we just read, right? The mind is adapting. And I mean, I guess we're saying the mind is adapting with age, right? We may have mental decline, but the brain is still growing and adapting in response to that.
This idea of compensation, I feel like is new.
Yeah.
Like, we never really brought, I mean, we said something's peak, something's, peak later, earlier, whatever. And we
Yeah.
mentioned that you're still learning. But
Yeah.
this idea of, hey, when one part goes down, another part kind of compensates and helps it out, like that's new. I've never seen that before. So, and it makes sense why they broke the paragraph they separated it because they want to focus on just this here.
Hmm.
So yeah, um, it's a new idea, right? Mind adjusts to compensate for losses.
Yes. And it's interesting when you're studying psychology, it kind of feels like, oh, well, this is, yeah, if we know it declines and we know we're continuing to learn, it's like, well, it makes sense, but this isn't psych. So we have to make sure we're keeping that in mind. It's important to stay in the course mindset. So yeah, the compensation idea is definitely new. The next sentence says, the brain too is almost infinitely plastic, containing many more neurons with more potential connections between them than we can use. Okay. Again, sounds very psychological or like, neurobiological, but it sounds like maybe this is part of the compensation process.
Yeah, this is where if if you've taken a class in neuroscience or psychology, you may actually understand this. But this
Yeah.
is not important.
Yeah.
Like this is not going to change what we already read. This is just more information on it. So this is I kind of brought this up before. Like if you get this, you feel good about it. But if you don't get it, then you're going to start questioning whether or not you're going to be on the right track. And I think for a lot of students, they do get it. And I'll tell you right now, like you're going to get a lot of passages that have this very kind of sentence, and you just won't get it. And I can't express to you how unimportant it really is, right? Other than right
Mhm.
now, like you'll see how they won't ever test this stuff. They're not going to get into the details on this. They're more focused on the actual argument rather than the underlying science behind the argument. So, yeah, let's just keep reading.
Awesome. Okay, if one neuron fails, those nearby can take on its load. Okay, I feel like if this wasn't a psych passage, this would have been the sentence that clarified the one that came before, right? Or if the sentence that came before was confusing about, the brain being infinitely plastic, this one would have been a lot more clear. If one neuron fails, the others nearby can take on their load, right? Like basically the brain can restructure itself. It can rearrange to compensate for losses and efficiency.
Great.
Sweet. Yeah. So that first sentence gave us a lot as far as what we want to know from paragraph number 4. Okay, looking at paragraph number 5, it says in humans, as in laboratory animals, a busy mental lifestyle keeps the mind fit, says Robert Shea, now director of the Gerontology Center in the College of Human Development at Penn State. Interesting. So being busy mentally keeps your mind fit. That's kind of a different statement than we've had before. That's an
Right.
interesting point.
Yeah, a lot of ideas, right? I mean, that's what
Mhm.
happens when it's an easier read. You're going to get more ideas that you have to keep track of.
Mhm.
I personally like the other way. I like a harder passage with like
Yeah,
three ideas because they
I
can't.
know, me too.
I prefer that than keeping track of all these little ideas and remembering them all, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, this is important to know, and I think most people agree with it, so it's not hard to remember.
Mhm.
Right? Keep your
Yeah.
mind, fit by just doing a lot. Okay.
Yeah. And tie it with this individual, Robert Shea
Yes,
or
very important. This is not the author's opinion. This
guy.
is
Mhm.
Robert Shea's opinion, and so we need to keep track of that.
Yes. Okay. The next sentence says such busy mental lifestyles allow the mind to adjust for other forms of mental deterioration associated with aging. So it sounds like, it's not just like busy mental life equals fit brain or fit mind. This is true while you age as well. The whole context of the passage is about aging. But this idea of like a busy mind is a fit mind applies to aging as well.
This is a very important sentence because they're kind of referencing what idea?
Yeah, the mental deterioration or decay part.
Yeah, and also the compensation, right?
Yeah.
Like it's basically saying the mind adjusts to compensate for losses because if you're doing these mental lifestyle things, you're adjusting and it you're not fully deteriorating, right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of going back to the previous paragraph,
Hmm.
that idea of compensation. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Okay, now we've got a direct quote. It says, quote, people intensely involved in life retain their intellectual abilities better than mental couch potatoes, end quote. I can only assume that this is Robert Shea, the individual that we're discussing right now, since we didn't say anybody else. Um, but again, if you are keeping a busy mind, your mind's going to be fit. Um, yeah, and it is relating to the compensation part, right? In the biological aspect of decay. So that's super interesting. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and this is how we find the main argument. The main argument repeats, and it seems like they're repeating this idea of compensation, right?
Yeah.
But this sentence is pretty straightforward. It's pretty similar to the first sentence of this paragraph.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. The conclusion may sound cliched, but it's drawn from the test scores of serious bridge players and crossword puzzle fanatics. So it kind of sounds like this sentence is functioning to like lend credibility to this individual Shay, right? Like it might sound kind of silly or it might sound like a cliche, but it's serious,
Yeah.
right? It's drawn from experimental evidence. The author wants us to take that seriously.
Awesome.
Okay, their cognition decreases less with age than that of people whose most challenging pastime is bingo. Okay, so it's not that like, we alluded to earlier. It's not like the author said, "Oh no, as you get older, your brain gets even better all the time, forever." Right? You're still experiencing decline, but much less so if you keep your mind fit. Um, so less than bingo, basically, if you are interested in bridge and crossword puzzles.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Okay, we've got another direct quote. It says, a person who stops solving problems arrives at a point where he can't solve problems. End quote. It says Shay declares. So again, if you stop problem solving, if you stop that sort of busy mind, your mind is not going to be fit anymore. It's kind of what it sounds like we're saying. If you stop thinking so hard, you're not going to be able to think that way anymore. That part might decay, is kind of what we're seeing.
Yeah. Pretty good summary of the entire paragraph, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's see what's going on in paragraph 6. Like we said, there's 7 paragraphs total with this passage. So let's see what paragraph 6 offers us. It says generally, people who develop chronic diseases after age 50 function less well mentally than they did before they became ill. Interesting. Okay, this sentence is kind of seeming to say that becoming ill leads to like mental decline. I mean, we talked about how, aging is something that affects all organs, but this is a chronic disease. Uh, I'm not
But
I'm not sure if we're going to keep talking about this. So
yeah, it
I'm not
doesn't.
sure how to interpret this.
Yeah, so they didn't say that directly. They didn't say if you're older, right, and you had a chronic disease, you're not gonna do well mentally. Like they're kind of saying it in a general way. I mean, they even say generally. There's no direct claim made yet. And so I would be careful with that conclusion. I think this is just an observation. Let's see where this goes. They could agree, they could disagree. We'll see.
Hmm. Okay. In his studies, Shea detected a decline in mental function among individuals who underwent lengthy hospitalizations for cancer, heart disease, or other chronic illness. So we have a decline in mental function with, in this case, more than just developing chronic disease. This is lengthy hospitalizations for their chronic disease. So that's at least a correlation that we're tying that Shay is.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay, the difference, however, was modest, suggesting that it was not the direct effect of disease. Okay, so to me, when they first introduced this situation of we have people becoming ill and we have at least an observation that they're functioning less mentally, I'm wondering how is this going to fit into the passage? Are we going to go off on kind of a new separate tangent, right? Like are we adding information to this? But a sentence like this is saying, "Hey, this is pretty modest. It's not because of the disease." So I'm thinking, okay, it's not
Right.
another thing that I necessarily have to worry about in this paragraph anymore. There's a possibility, but you've clarified, nope, this is not something that I need to be concerned with.
Right.
Okay, he postulated that it might be due to the passivity and mental indolence encouraged by hospital routine. Okay, you might not know what mental indolence means, but passivity with the hospital routine to me feels close enough to, right, kind of the opposite of what we mentioned before, right? If you have a busy mental lifestyle, you keep the mind fit. This, if you're really passive and you're stuck in this hospital routine, that doesn't sound like a very busy mind. And maybe that's part of why you're declining mentally, right? It's kind of the flip side, right? We said busy mind is a fit mind. This is like a passive mind is maybe less a fit mind.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean,
Same
we could.
idea from the
Yeah.
opposite direction.
It's such a interesting perspective because just because they said a busy mind is a healthier mind, right? Doesn't necessarily mean that if you're not busy, it's not healthy, right? I mean, we can
Hmm.
assume that. It's an assumption.
Hmm.
Here, the author is making that a direct claim,
Yes.
and it's sort of similar. It's
Hmm.
the same like realm. So I would say it's consistent with the last two paragraphs, really, or the last paragraph.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, we've got one more paragraph and it's super short. So let's take a look. It says Shay's wife and colleague, Sherry Willis, PhD, tested this idea by giving puzzle-like assignments in problem solving and reasoning to a group of long-term hospital patients over age 65, then coached them in mental strategies and shortcuts. Okay, so we said that we're testing this idea. We're probably still talking about this hospitalization, kind of slowing down the mind. What though it sounds like in this sentence is we're maybe trying to wake the mind back up. Problem solving, mental strategies, shortcuts. We're trying to wake people up or wake their minds up at least. Um, I don't know what the effect of this is going to be. I don't know what the conclusion will be, but I see that maybe we're trying to intervene and see, can your brain maybe come back after a period of mental or reduced mental fitness or fit mind, right?
Right. Right.
I'm interested. You've got me hooked, Sherry Willis, PhD.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Next sentence gives us a short and sweet answer. It just says their cognition improved. So super short sentence, but it's kind of profound. It's kind of, put together with the sentence before, telling you that how busy your mind is really does matter with how fit your brain is, or your mind is, right? Even if you're in a situation like a long-term hospitalization that's slowing your mind down, if I can get it to speed back up, your cognition is going to improve. It's like we kind of talked about, it's a different context than when we first brought up this idea that a busy mind is a fit mind, but it's supporting that idea from paragraph 5 as well. And also, possibly, it sounds like talking about that adaptation aspect or the compensation aspect. They can still improve that cognition.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds good. I mean, this exactly the problem is this is still an experiment and we don't know for a fact if this is true, right?
Hmm.
But the author definitely agrees with this point, right?
Hmm.
Seems like it. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Last sentence. This one went by fast. 7 years later, they retained their renewed mental vigor. Interesting. So, wow, that lasted 7 years. It's not a temporary thing. 7 years later, they're still having this more fit, vigorous mind. That's pretty cool. Now I'm gonna invest in some crossword puzzles. I
Right.
think that's the take home from this.
I guess playing chess once in a, while isn't so bad after all.
Yeah. I'm gonna
Okay.
go find a word search to mess around with. So
Okay.
so Jack, what do you think is the main point? What do we need to be tracking from a passage like this?
I,
We had a
I
lot of ideas.
yeah, there are a lot of ideas. So we have to understand all of them, and we have to
Mhm.
know where they are located. They're going to care about the location of these ideas. But
Yes.
ultimately, the idea is that just because you're older doesn't mean your mind is going to, going to nothing, right?
Yeah.
Like your mind adapts, your mind adjusts.
Hmm.
And that the more activity you have, the better your mind your mind ends up doing, or better, ends up being. So I think the main idea here is basically our mind adjusts, compensates for any sort of losses, and this idea that a busy mental life keeps your mind fit. I think those are the two big ideas that we have to keep track of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I like that you bring up the fact that yeah, there's a lot of ideas, and we actually do need to know what they are. It's not just that, you find the one thing that truly matters and you can ignore everything else, especially because, as you pointed out, paragraph two is kind of a counter, not totally a counterpoint, but kind of that oversimplification. And the author is adjusting that statement. It's not just that the mind declines with age, and while the body declines, the mind declines. That's too simple, right? We have that perspective, and then we have the author's kind of tweaked perspective. To me, whenever I see that kind of either point, counterpoint, or like a claim and then tweaking it a little bit, I want to know the original claim too. Not that it's, a main idea, but it's something they could absolutely ask about. Like, how was the author's essential point different from what we discussed first in that earlier paragraph? Like, how did the idea change as we went throughout the passage? I feel
Yeah,
like I see questions like that all the time.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, understanding the structure of the passage, where they started and where they ended. Where they ended was very different than where they started, right?
Yeah,
It's not that all of our organs are just withering away. It's that our organs adapt and change. And yes, overall, there are some losses, but it compensates, right? I think that's
exactly. Yes. Amazing. Well, I feel like that sums it up pretty nicely. Again, we hope that you enjoy going through this sentence by sentence with us. We certainly like doing it alongside you guys. If you want to take another look at the passage text, we've got the link to the passage itself or in the caption in the description of wherever you are finding this episode, whether it be Spotify or YouTube or Apple Podcasts or wherever. I would definitely encourage you to check that link because you could also try the questions that come along with this passage. And you can get a chance to see how the MCAT would ask a question about a passage like this. Definitely would encourage that. Again, that the questions are what ultimately is going to get you the points on your MCAT, but you can't get the questions right unless you know what the passage was about. So make sure to get that extra practice and know that if you want additional cars practice, this was a daily passage from our website. We post them every day, just like the name sounds. We also have, gosh, I think it's almost 2,000 cars questions in the just general question bank area of our website that are all free and very, very high quality. So if you need cars help and practice, come see us, jackwestin.com. There's so many practice questions available to you at the click of your mouse. So definitely check it out. We hope you enjoyed, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll catch you in the next one.
awesome.